Okay, so we are with Pietro Polsinelli, and he already told everything about him, and so we'll see your talk about gamification and game design. Enjoy.
Thank you. Actually, the slides I'm presenting here are already online, so you can find them at the short URL I've put on the slide. So I'm Pietro Polsinelli. I'm a very long time software developer, mostly doing enterprise corporate web-based solutions. But since 2010, I've been studying and working on game design. And in the last few years, I've also actually followed and designed some games, which is a non-trivial task. So, but what I want to talk today is a very specific topic, and in fact, I would like to get to some very concrete strategies and tips on how to solve situations. So, the field I work on and I'm gonna focus on today is applied games. This is one of the many definitions that you find. It's a very hard to define field, and there's no exact boundary between applied and non-applied games. But let's say I like this definition: is a game designed for a primary purpose, which is not pure entertainment. Okay. Now, if you examine the details, there are hardly ever games that are pure entertainment. But let's take this as a rougher study and as a guide. But this is not the focus of today's. And I also quite like serious games as a definition, though in the field of game design, the term is highly debated because it seems that it's pointing up to games which are not great fun. But serious game in the sense, it's a kind of applied games that deal with really hard problems, like problems with dealing with health, problems of social problems, communication problems, and so this is one of the fields I'm working on. Now, working in another term is persuasive games for this field. So games that are not pure entertainment. One of the great things in working this field is that you get to learn a lot about many subjects that are not strictly, I mean, they're diverse subjects which are not neither software development nor game design, but it's a matter at hand. And of course, you have to learn a lot about the matter at hand when you're doing the game design, because the two things, the details about what you're working on influence the game's design greatly. And this is one of the reasons why recipes, lists, simple lists or recipes, which go under often the name of gamification, are not very useful in general. Because you have to get into the details of the matter at hand, and this deeply influences the game design you're dealing with. So, one useful in my experience, in my limited experience, when you're entering the field of applied games, is to make as soon as possible the distinction between projective experiences and couching. Okay, so one thing is when you're designing something through which the player will go through a complex experience which is entirely inside the so-called magic circle. The magic circle is the universe which the games evokes and defines. And you have an experience which is inside this magic circle. Like a classical example, magic circle, as soon as you start watching a football game, the magic circle is the fact that you move in a universe where running after a ball is something that has a sense, which if you, for a moment, break the magic circle, it's something ridiculous and nonsensical. But inside the experience of the football game, this is something that makes a lot of sense. So this is one thing. This is one category, okay, of game, and it's a kind of work. Another different kind of design and experience is when you're coaching. So it is when you're following some activity, maybe in the real world, okay, and you're sort of hinting, helping, going along. So like you're training somebody to do something, and you help and you hint and you follow by using tools, mechanics, and styles which come from game design. Okay, so training somebody and making an immersive experience. I mean, this if you have this clear when you're approaching the customer, asking you to do something in applying game design to another field, if you have these two clear in mind, you can help both yourself and the customer in guiding this. Of course, the two things touch. So many techniques are similar, but it's not the same thing. So where does the problem start? The problem I want to focus on. Well, when companies, customers, institutions come to you and sort of want to use games to express or do or solve problems or teach something, in my experience, there's a sort of pattern that repeats. And it's this. It's due to this. It's the fact that everybody knows what a game is. Everybody recognizes a game when they see it, though it's very hard to define. And in fact, it's not even game designers can. There's no agreement in game design on defining what a game is. In fact, it's an extremely hard topic because game is one of those terms which have infinite depth, you know? like I don't know, good or things like this. But that's okay. The problem is that when people from the fact that they can recognize a game move to believing that they can design a game, okay? Because everybody knows what a game is, so everybody can design a game. No, it's not so. Designing games is extremely hard. It's extremely, extremely hard topic. And so of course, the problem is that you will be meeting, when you meet customers that are enough open-minded to want to deal with their specific topic with games. The problem is that you will be meeting very experienced people in their own field. So they're used to, they're not used to people saying no to them. Okay, so they have to come with the most ridiculous ideas, and you have to sort of guide them through to something that makes sense for the field. At least in the several projects I've been working with, I've seen this pattern. In fact, this is the topic, the problem I want to deal with today with you. And so this will be the first problem. So I will go into a real world case where I've met this kind of pattern problem. And I will start with Games for Health. So Games for Health is an established field. And just to let you know, I mean, the fact that using games for applied games is not a novelty. It's not something new. This has been going for more than 10 years now. There's a world association, there's Games for Change, and there's a European Association for Games for Health, and there are hundreds of applications. So it's not news. So in this case, we wanted to help people that are evolving towards a chronic disease by influencing behavior and disrupting this evolution. This is the mission of the project, okay? Now, the problem is that, of course, the customer came with a lot of ideas about how to do this. And this beautiful distinction, it hasn't, the slide it's just a bad picture from the internet, but that's all because it hasn't been released yet. But this is from Jan Bogost, who is a well-known, probably the most well-known game critic and teacher of game design at Georgia Tech, which is like the main game critic, PhD in US. So anyway, and he made, I think this is one of the most brilliant distinction, because when we talk about game design, gamification, it's really hard, it's a muddy waters to distinguish the two things. But the feeling for people who are doing game design, there's a feeling that the two things are deeply different. And in fact, they are deeply different. And there are conceptual distinctions. And he, in this two list, I think, the two approaches gets clearer how different the two approaches are. And in fact, it was funny that meeting these customers, they almost had all projected on their idea of a game, all the ideas on the right, while of course I come with all the ideas on the left. And so this is the kind of pattern that I have found in other cases coming out. So inspired by a certain very specific category of games. So the problem is that when you're doing applied games, you can't just take any kind of game and then say, okay, let's do the same thing in another field. Because the problems that you want to solve and are from the start quite different. So for example, in the case of my diabetes training application, well, first of all, it has to be deeply inclusive. Okay, so it has to be inclusive in the sense that it has to fit the most wide and different kind of public. While classical games, that is, if you think about simply, if your experience has been just first-person shooters on the Xbox or things like this, these are extremely selective, okay, and that's good for their field. So I mean, if games are competitive games are extremely general and category specific. Okay, so it's fine for them to select their public. Actually, they want to reach that specific target, and so they do everything to be built for this kind of people who are usually very competitive, for example. But as you may know, not everybody is competitive. Okay, so not all approaches to gaming are competitive. Actually, it's probably a minority of the users. And so also, and the same goes for rewarding. Okay, so competitiveness and search for rewards are two things that are linked. And the same thing for looking for a quantified gaming experience. But mostly, in what specifically games are good at is in approaching people to complex problems in such a way that you can reach a very wide audience. And in particular, in the case of applied games, unless of course you have a specific case where you're selecting the audience. But in my case, in this case, in giving it's a health problem that is across ages, across genres, across countries. It's universal. And so for sure, we have to switch if we want to use games. Games in this case are good because they can bring you complex information in an approachable way. And so there's really a change of language. It's more a change of language and a change of language is a symptom of a conceptual change. So we want to bring about a transformational process, and we want to enter into a relationship with the player user of our game. So this is the kind of process that I went through. And in fact, if you explain it clearly, in my experience, customers usually understand this, because if you say, okay, so you really actually want your game to be selective on the small slice of users which adore competition? No, of course. Okay? If you have a worldwide health problem, you want to try to reach everyone. And do you want information that we transmit to betray the complexity of a health problem like diabetes? No, of course. We want to refine the communication. We want to progressively refine the information that we're transmitting. And in this, the experience of gaming, okay, not the rewards, not the engagement, but the experience of playing can bring about information in an approachable way. Of course, it's a complex operation, and it's an expensive operation. And okay, but let's go on with other examples. So we moved from competition rewards level to having a mentor, having past story transformation. So here, if you're familiar with storytelling processes, storytelling, it's very useful skill to use in game design, even in games that are not just a linear story, in very broad spectrum of games. Another transformational design story I had in my consulting is what I work with a Global Sustainability Institute. They work on climate change. They're in Cambridge, and they're very smart scientists, but they're very much scientists. So on the communication part, they had the problem, of course, to make people more aware of the consequences of climate change in their daily work habits in the future. So, and what they came out with was to publish an agent-based model to make people perceive what could be the consequences. And of course, this is not so cool, and it doesn't solve your communication problem. And so what I propose them instead is to project in a dystopian future and have a storytelling experience, okay, where you are a different kind of people, and you have different roles, and so in fact, so I brought them along this process of changing and having a transformational relationship with the player, and they appreciate it, and this is the project that we put together. An even harder topic in this case, it's about a European project for increasing communication with families with kids in families where they're suffering neglect and abuse. As I told you, you get to learn a lot of stuff aside from game design when you work in these fields. Most of this stuff is not very pleasant, but that's another problem. But that's the world. Okay. So anyway, so this is a particular case, because this came from in the UK. They have a lot of recent immigration families, and they have the problem of getting to people working in social services. They have the problem to get to talk with kids and young people. It's very hard, okay? So in this case, you see, games are traditionally thought of as something that gets you to isolate. But in this case, we're using the language of games in order to reach a dialogue with the kids and young people. And so this is interesting, is a change in the semantics. But anyway, the first thing that they had done, they took a game which has nothing to do with communication transformation, and they just changed the people who were developing the software. They just changed the labels in the game, like the background labels, and that was it. The mechanic of the game wasn't changed. This is a typical gamification example. You just put labels, put rewards. But this didn't work at all, of course. And instead, I proposed them as an example, Dumb Boys to Die, which is a beautiful game, which of course is not mine. It's from the Australian Railways. And as an example to have a projection mechanism, and so that instead of being the kids having the problem, there's somebody else having the problem, but of course it's a way of talking about your own problems. And the problems can be very serious and hard to talk about. Like for example, social services in the UK, they provide you with a meal if you don't have enough money for a meal. There are some families that have just one meal a day, but of course the kids will never tell you that, okay? Or they perceive that as normal. So you have to get to know and talk with them about this. Okay. Then another example, but this is from my own initiative, is in the case of urban design. Again here, classical games, city builders on urban design, they work from the architect, from the God perspective. So you're the architect and doing it. But nobody, like in SimCity, nobody ever asks, what's the opinion of the people living in those towns? Okay, so instead I started designing a game, and here actually this theme is not that I invented. There's a lot of debate on this in urban planning and design field about how towns should be redesigned. So I designed a game where this is not complete, not done at all, but I designed a game where you can guide people to protest and complain about a town being built. So the gray colors are brown, dark colors are the town as it would be built by a purely functional perspective. And by sending people protesting in different parts of town, you can change the town structure. If you search for Bogota and the major Bogota, you may see what I'm getting at. So my tips to guide this transformational process is the techniques that is most effective in this case is to try to provide as quickly as possible to your customer prototypes of what you're doing, because what I talked about, the transformational process, at least in its project and in its design, does not need a complete game to be in place. Another tool which is great, use card games to model universe. If you're a developer, you can use cards as a synonym of classes. Use cards for classes, and that brings you to a model that can be changed in interacting with your customer and in the discussion. And in this way you can go to prototypes and have a more mature discussion about content and storytelling. This is something also that is very cool if you get in a constructive relationship with your customers. Concrete examples, like with the Global Sustainability Institute, the discussion wasn't working at all, but then when we got to say, but what would change when we're preparing breakfast? That was great. Now they had all ideas what would change if you're preparing breakfast in the morning and there has been a global warming crisis. And that's something that we can all understand and that reaches people way more than a grid with squares and numbers. I think my time is okay. Okay, so I'll end up here, and so if we have questions. Yes.
Sorry, I didn't catch your background. Do you have urban planning background? Is that your focus?
No. I don't have a urban planning background. I just studied this on myself. In this case, I'm in contact with architects with the urban planning team, but it's the only example I made which is actually led by myself. So it's not produced for a corporate customer.
I was just wondering if there was any collaboration. Do you look?
I'm trying to bring it out. I'll be in 2 weeks in Holland with an urban planning guy, and so we talk about it.
You said in Netherlands?
In Netherlands, yes.
Oh, okay. Because I heard there was like some huge metropolitan efforts or initiatives going on.
Yeah,
to make the city more smarter and all that.
Yeah, but because it's not the Archy Star or the beautiful, the rich towns like Amsterdam or London I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about countries where like you don't have pavement or things like this. So
Right.
the approach is very different from that one.
Okay, time is over, so thank you very much.